Hello, friends. Nick here, and I'm back with another chapter of The Indian in the Cupboard. This one is chapter 9, The Breakfast Truce. And once again, Indian in the Cupboard by Lynne Reid Banks, a classic young adult children's novel. I'm reading this for my kids, for your kids, or if you're a kid, your kid at heart. Please enjoy and stick with me as we jump into The Breakfast Truce. And remember, in our previous chapter, we've just gotten to know the second character that Omri and his friend Patrick have now brought to life, named Boone. He's a cowboy. So let's see how things go between Boone and Little Bear, these two figures brought to life over breakfast. He crept downstairs. The house was still asleep. He decided to cook breakfast for himself and his cowboy, an Indian. He was quite a good cook, and he'd mostly done sweet stuff before. However, any fool, he felt sure, could fry an egg. The steaks were out of question. Because remember, Boone was like, yeah, get me some eggs and steak. That will be just great. And Omri's like, we'll see. Steaks were out of question, but the beans were no problem. That's what Boone wanted. Omri put butter in the frying pan on the stove, and the fat began to smoke. Omri broke an egg into it, or tried to, but the shell, instead of coming cleanly apart, crumpled up somehow in his hand and landed in the hot fat mixed up with the egg. Has that not happened to all of us at least once? Not as easy as he thought. Leaving the mess to cook, shell and all, he got a tin of beans out of the cupboard and opened it without trouble. Then he got a saucepan and began pouring the beans in. Some of them got into the egg pan somehow and seemed to explode. The egg was beginning to curl and the pan was still smoking. Alarmed, he turned off the heat. The center of the egg still wasn't cooked, and the beans in the pan were stone cold, but the smell in the kitchen was beginning to worry him. He didn't want his mother coming down. He tipped the whole lot into a bowl, hacked a lopsided slice off a loaf of bread, and tiptoed up the stairs again. Little Bear was standing outside his longhouse with his hands on his hips waiting for him. You bring food? He asked in his usual bossy way. Yes. First, Little Bear want ride. First, you must eat while it's hot. I've been to a lot of trouble to cook it for you, Omri said, sounding like his mother. Little Bear didn't know how to take this, so he burst into a rather forced laugh, and pointed at him scornfully. Omri cook! Omri woman! He teased, but Omri wasn't bothered. All the best cooks are men, he retorted. Come on, you're going to eat with Boone. Little Bear's laugh died instantly. Who's Boone? You know who he is, the cowboy. The Indian's hands came off his hips, and one of them went for his knife. Oh, knock it off, Little Bear. Have a truce for breakfast, otherwise you won't get any. Leaving him with that thought to chew over, let's see what he did there, Omri crossed to the crate in which Boone was grooming his white horse with a wisp of cloth he'd found clinging to a splinter. He'd taken off the little saddle, but the bridle was still on. Boone, I've brought something to eat, said Omri. Yep, I thought I'd smell something good, said Boone. Let's get to it. Omri put his hand down. Climb on. Oh, shucks, where am I going? Why can't I eat in my box where it's safe? Whined Boone, but he clambered up into Omri's palm and sat grumpily with his back against his middle finger. You're going to eat with the Indian, Omri said. Boone leaped up so suddenly he nearly fell off and had to grab hold of a thumb to steady himself. Heck no, I ain't, he yelled. You just put me down, son, you hear? I ain't sharing my victual with no lousy scalp snaffling Injun, and that's my last word. I'm starting to get this little accent here. It was, as it happened, his last word before being set down within 6 inches of his enemy on the seed tray. They both bent their legs into crouches, as if uncertain whether to leap at each other's throats or turn and flee. Omri hurriedly spooned some egg and beans and held it between them. Smell that, he ordered them. Now you eat together or you don't get any at all. So make up your minds to it. You can start fighting again afterwards if you must. He took a bit of clean paper and laid it, like a tablecloth, under the spoon. Then he broke off some crumbs of bread crust and pushed a little into each of their hands. Still with their eyes fixed on each other's faces, Indian and cowboy sidled towards the big steaming bowl of food from opposite sides. Little Bear, after hesitating, was first to shoot his arm out and dip the bread into the egg. The sudden movement startled Boone so much he let out a yell, "Ah!" and tried to run, but Omri's hand was blocking the way. "Don't be silly, Boone," he said firmly. "I ain't being silly. Them Injuns ain't just ornery and savage, them's dirty. And I ain't eating from the same bowl as no—" "Boone," Omri said quietly, "Little Bear is no dirtier than you. You should see your own face." And here's the standoff between Little Bear and Boone. "Is that my fault? What kind of hallucination are you, anyways, telling me I'm dirty when you didn't bring me no washing water?" This was a fair complaint, but Omri wasn't about to lose the argument on a side issue. "You can have some after breakfast, but if you don't agree to eat with my Indian, I'm going to tell him your nickname." Remember what his nickname was from the last chapter? Boo-hoo Boone, because he cries so much. The cowboy's face fell. "Now that ain't fair. That plumb ain't no ways fair," he muttered. But the hunger was getting the better of him anyway. So grumbling and swearing under his breath, he turned back and marched to his side of the spoon. By this time, Little Bear was seated cross-legged on the piece of paper, a hunk of bean in one hand and a mess of egg in the other, eating heartily. Seeing this, Boone lost no time in tucking in, eyeing the Indian, who ignored him. "Where's my coffee?" he complained after he'd eaten a few bites. "I can't start the day till I've had my jug of coffee." Omri had completely forgotten about coffee, but he was beginning to be pretty well fed up with being bossed around by ungrateful little men, so he settled down to eat the remains of the food and simply said, "Well, you'll have to start this one without any." Little Bear finished his breakfast and stood up. "Now we fight," he announced, and reached for his knife. Shink. Omri expected Boone to leap up and run, but he didn't. He just sat there munching bread and beans. "I ain't finished yet," he said. "Ain't gonna fight till I'm plumb full of victuals, so you can just sit down and wait, Redskin." Omri laughed. "Good for you, Boone. Take it easy, Little Bear. Don't forget your promise." We're all getting along here, a little chummy. Little Bear scowled, but he sat down again. Boone ate and ate. It was hard not to suspect after a while that he was eating as much and as slowly as possible to put off the moment when he would have to fight. At last, very reluctantly, he scraped the last bit of egg from his spoon, wiped his hands on the side of his trousers, and stood up. Little Bear was on his feet instantly. Omri stood ready to part them. "Look here, Injun," said Boone. "If we're going to fight, we're going to fight fair. Probably ain't even a word for fair in your language, but I'm here to tell you, with me, is fight fair or don't fight at all. Little Bear fight fair, kill fair, scalp fair. You ain't going to scalp nobody, lest you take it off with your teeth." For answer, Little Bear raised his knife, which flashed in the morning light. Omri was on his knees, and waited. "Yeah, I see it, but you ain't going to have it much longer. And why ain't you? Because I ain't got one. I only got my gun, and my guns run plumb out of bullets. What I got, and all I got, is my fists. Oh, and one other thing. I got my hallucination here." He waved a hand at Omri without taking his eyes off Little Bear for a second. "And I know he don't want to see this here purty red scalp of mine hanging from no stinking redskin's belt. So if a fight, it's just going to be fist to fist, face to face, man to man, Injun. Did you hear me? No weapons. Just us two. Let's see if a white man can't lick a red man in a fair fight. Less'n maybe, just maybe, you ain't red at all, but yeller." And Boone stepped around the bowl of the spoon, threw his empty gun to the ground, and put up his fists like a boxer. Little Bear was nonplussed. He lowered his knife and stared at Boone. Whether Little Bear had completely understood the cowboy's strange speech was doubtful, but he couldn't mistake the gesture of throwing the gun away. As Boone began to dance around him, fists up, making little mock jabs towards his face, Little Bear was getting madder and madder. He made a sudden swipe at him with his knife. Boone jumped back. "Oh, you naughty Injun. I see I'll have to set my hallucination on you." But Omri didn't have to do anything. Little Bear had got the message. Throwing down the knife in a fury, he hurled himself onto Boone. What followed was not a fist fight, or a wrestling match, or anything so well organized. It was just an all-in, no-holds-barred two-man war. They rolled on the ground, pummeling, kicking, and butting with their heads. At one point, Omri thought he saw Boone trying to bite. Maybe he succeeded, because Little Bear suddenly let him go, and Boone rolled away, swift as a barrel, down a slope and onto his legs, and then, with a spring like a bow-legged panther, onto the Indian again, feet first. Little Bear let out a noise. Oof! He caught Boone by both ankles and heaved him off. Little Bear picked up a clod of compost and flung it after him, catching him full in the face. Then Little Bear got up and ran at him, holding both fists together and swinging them as hard as he swung the battle axe. They caught the cowboy with a heavy whack in the ear, which sent him flying to one side. But as he flew, he caught Little Bear with a blow in the chest with one boot, and that left them both on the ground. Well, the next moment, each of the men found himself pinned down by a giant finger. "All right, boys, that's enough," said Omri in his father's firm end-of-the-fight voice. "It's a draw. Now you must get cleaned up for school." How about that? And I'll tell you what, since that was short, we can move ahead to Chapter 11, School. So this is my first back-to-back chapter recording, but if you're in this far anyways, you're probably like, get on with it, Nick. So let's go on to Chapter 10, shall we? School. He brought them a low type of egg cup full of hot water and a corner of soap cut off a big cake to wash with. They stood on each side of the bowl. Little Bear stripped off his bandolier, which left him naked to the waist. Then he lost no time in plunging his arms in and began energetically rubbing the whole top of his body with his wet hands, throwing water everywhere. He made a lot of noise about it and seemed to be enjoying himself, though he ignored the soap. Boone was a different matter. Omri had already noticed that Boone was none too fussy about being clean, and in fact didn't look as if he'd washed or shaved for weeks. Now he approached the hot water gingerly, eyeing Omri as if to see how little washing he could actually get away with. "Come on, Boone, take off that shirt. You can't wash your neck with a shirt on," said Omri briskly, echoing his mother. With extreme reluctance, shivering theatrically, Boone dragged off his plaid shirt, keeping his hat on. "I should think your hair could do with a wash, too," said Omri. Boone stared at him. "Wash my hair?" he asked incredulously. "Washing hair's for women, ain't for men." But he did consent to rub his hands lightly over the piece of soap, although grimacing hideously if it were some slimy dead thing, and wash at least the palms of his hands. Then he rinsed them hastily, smeared some water on his face, reached for his shirt, and without even drying himself. "Boone," Omri said sternly, "just look at Little Bear. You called him dirty, but at least he's washing himself thoroughly. Now you just do something about your neck and, well, under your arms." Boone's look was now one of stark horror. "Under my arms?" "And your chest, I should think. I'm not taking you to school all sweaty." "Heck, don't you go running down sweat. It's sweat that keeps a man clean. Oh, don't you go running down sweat." I guess it must be like, don't go knocking down the idea of sweat. It keeps a man clean. Some old school thinking on this here. After a lot of bullying, Omri managed to get him to wash at least a few more bits of himself. "You'll have to wash your clothes sometime too," he said. But this was too much for Boone. "Ain't nobody gonna touch my duds, and that's final," he said. "Ain't been washed since I bought 'em. Water takes all the stuffing out of good cloth. Without all the dust and sweat, they don't keep you warm no more." At last, they were ready, and Omri pocketed them and ran down for breakfast. He felt tense with excitement. He'd never carried them around the house before. It was risky, but not so risky as taking them to school, and he felt that having family breakfast with them secretly in his pocket was like training for taking them to school. Breakfast in his house was often a dicey meal anyway, with everybody more or less bad-tempered. Today, for instance, Adil had lost his football shorts and was blaming everybody in turn, and their mother had just discovered that Gillian, contrary to his assurances the night before when he had wanted to watch television, had not finished his homework. Their father was grumpy because he had wanted to do some gardening, and it was raining yet again.
I know I put them in the laundry basket, Adil was saying fretfully. If you did, I washed them, in which case they'd be back in your top drawer, said his mother. But you didn't, because I didn't, and they're not. Now listen to me, Gillian. It's only a bit of history, one mini little castle to draw and a tiny paragraph to write, said Gillian. I can do it at school. Stinking climate, muttered their father. These onion sets will rot if I don't get them in soon. Gillian, did you borrow them? I've got my own. Omri ate it. That's about the shorts. Omri ate his cereal in silence, grinning to himself, hugging his secret. He slipped a couple of cornflakes into his pockets. I bet Omri took them, Adil said suddenly. Omri looked up. Took what? My shorts. What on earth would I want your shorts for? It might be your idea as a joke to hide them, Adil retorted. This was not as outrageous as it sounds. It had, until very recently, been a common form of revenge when Adil or Gillian had been specifically unbearable for Omri to sneak some valuable possession and hide it. I don't know, pretty good move if you got bigger brothers. Now, however, Omri felt very far away from such babyishness and was quite insulted. Don't be stupid, he said. So you did, said Adil in triumph. I did not. You're red in the face. That's proof. You're guilty. I swear, said Omri. They're probably under your bed, said their mother to Adil. Go up and have a look. I have looked. I've looked everywhere. Oh my God, it's starting to hail now, said their father despairingly. So much for the apple blossom. Under the cover of the moans that went up about the prospect of no apples in the autumn, and with the exclamations about the size of the hailstones, Omri slipped his coat on and ran through the bouncing ice lumps to school. That's hail, for those of you who don't know. Ice lumps. On the way, he stopped under a protecting yew tree and took the little men out. He showed them each a large hailstone, which to them was the size of a football. Now, when we get to school, said Omri, you must lie very still and quiet in my pockets. I'm putting you in separate ones because I can't risk any fighting or quarreling. If you're seen, I don't know what will happen. Danger? Said Little Bear, his eyes gleaming. Yes. Not of death so much. You might be taken away from me. Then you'd never get back to your own time. You mean we'd never wake up out of this here drunken dream? Said Boone. If that's how you look at it, no. But Little Bear was staring at him very thoughtfully. Own time, he said musingly. Very strange magic. Omri had never arrived at school with more apprehension in his heart, not even on spelling test days. And yet, he was excited too. Once he had taken a white mouse to school in his blazer pocket. He'd planned to do all sorts of fiendish things with it, like putting it up the teacher's trouser leg. He had a man teacher then. Or down the back of a girl's neck, or just putting it on the floor and letting it run around and throw the whole class into chaos. He actually hadn't dared to do anything with it except let it peep out and make his neighbors giggle. This time, he had no such plans. All he was hoping was that he could get through the day without anybody finding out. Patrick was waiting for him at the school gate. Have you got him? Yes. His eyes lit up. Give! I want him. All right, said Omri, but you have to promise that you won't show him to anybody. And this is Patrick waiting for Omri here at the school gate. Omri reached into his right pocket, closed his fingers gently around Boone, and passed him into Patrick's hand. The moment Omri let go of him, things started to happen. A particularly nasty little girl named April, who had been right across the playground at the moment of the transaction, was at Patrick's side about 2 seconds later. What have you got there? What did he give you? She asked in a raucous voice like a crow's. Patrick flushed red. Nothing. Push off, he said. At once, April pointed her witchy finger at him. Look at Patrick blushing. Look at Patrick blushing, she squawked. Several other children speedily arrived at the scene, as children do, as a certain type of child will, whenever somebody's getting taunted, and soon Patrick and Omri found themselves surrounded. Uh-oh. Children just have a certain way of knowing when someone's keeping a secret, right? What's he got? Bet it's something horrid. bet it's a slimy toad. A wriggly worm, more like. A beetle. Like him. Omri felt his blood begin to get hot in his head. He longed to bash them all one by one, or better still, all at once, a giant knocking down hordes of enemies like skittles. He imagined them all rolling backwards down a long flight of steps in waves bowled over by his flashing fists and flying feet. The best he could manage, in reality, though, was to lower his head and, keeping his hand cuffed stiffly over his left pocket, barge through the chanting circle. He caught one of them a good butt in the stomach, which was rather satisfying. Patrick was hot on his heels, and they belted across the playground and through the double doors, which fortunately had just been opened. Once inside, they were relatively safe. There were teachers all over the place, and any kind of fighting or taunting above a sly pinch or a snide whisper was out. Patrick and Omri slowed to a walk, went to their places, and sat down, trying to look perfectly calm and ordinary so as not to attract their teacher's attention. Their breathing gave them away, though. "Well, you two, what are you puffing about? Been running?" They glanced at each other and nodded. "So long as you've not been fighting," she said, giving them a sharp look. She always behaved as if a little fight was a long step along the road to hell. Neither of the boys got much work done during the morning. They couldn't concentrate. Each one of them was too aware of the passenger in his pocket. Both Little Bear and Boone were restless, particularly Little Bear. Boone was naturally lazier. He kept dozing off in the dark, and then waking with a little jump that made Patrick very nervous. But Little Bear was scrambling about the whole time. It was during the third period, when they were all in the main hall listening to the headmaster, whose name was Mr. Johnson, announcing plans for the end-of-year show, that Little Bear got really sick and tired of being imprisoned and started to take drastic action. The first thing Omri knew was a sharp prick in his hip, as if an insect had stung him. For a moment, he was silly enough to think an ant or even a wasp had somehow gotten into his clothes. He only just stopped himself from slapping his hand instinctively against his side to squish it. Then there came another jab, sharper than the first, sharp enough, in fact, to make Omri let out a short yelp. "Who did that?" said Mr. Johnson irritably. Omri didn't answer, but the girls sitting near him began giggling and staring. "Was that you, Omri?" "Yes. I'm sorry. Something stuck into me." "Patrick, did you stick a pencil into Omri?" Such a thing was not unknown during assemblies when they were bored. "No, Mr. Johnson." "Well, be quiet when I'm talking." Another jab, and this time Little Bear meant business and kept his knife embedded. Omri shouted, "Ouch!" and jumped to his feet. "Omri, Patrick, leave the hall." "But I didn't," said Patrick. "Out, I said," shouted Mr. Johnson furiously. They left, Patrick walking normally, and Omri dancing about shouting, "Ow, ow!" at every step as Little Bear continued to dig the needle point of his knife in. Wow, Little Bear, you're taking big risks here. The whole school was in hysterics of laughter, and Mr. Johnson was frothing with rage. By the time they reached the swinging doors and departed, outside they ran. Well, Patrick ran, and Omri performed a series of sideways leaps to the far end of the playground. On the way, Omri plunged his hands into his pocket, seized Little Bear, and dragged him out. The agony stopped. Safe in a sheltered corner behind some privet bushes, Omri held his persecutor at eye level and shook him violently the way you shook a bottle of medicine. He called him the worst names he could possibly think of. When he'd run out of swear words, which was not for some time, he hissed, like Mr. Johnson, "What do you mean by it? How dare you? How dare you stick your knife into me?" "Little Bear dare. Omri keep in dark many hours, Little Bear. Want to see school place, not lie in hot dark. No breathe, no see. Want enjoy." "I warned you wouldn't. It's not my fault you made me bring you. Now you've got me into trouble." Little Bear looked mulish, but he stopped shouting. Seeing this evidence that a truce was on its way, Omri calmed down a bit too. "Listen, I can't let you see because I can't take you out. You have no idea what would happen if I did. If any of the other children saw you, they'd want to grab you, mess with you. You'd hate it. And it would be terribly dangerous too. You'd probably get hurt or killed. You've got to lie quiet till school's over. I'm sorry if you're bored, but it's your own fault." Little Bear thought this over, and then he said a most astonishing thing. "Want Boone." "What? Your enemy?" "Better enemy than alone in the dark." Patrick had taken Boone out of his pocket. The little cowboy was sitting on his hand. They were gazing at each other. Omri said, "Boone, Little Bear says he wants you. He's lonely and bored." "Well, ain't that just too bad," said Boone sarcastically. "After he tried to kill me, now he's come over all lovey-dovey. Listen, you redskin," he shouted through cupped hands across the yawning gulf between Patrick and Omri. "I don't care how lonesome you are. I don't care if you drop down dead. The only good Injun is a dead Injun. You hear me?" Little Bear turned his head haughtily away. "I think he's lonely too, really," said Patrick in a whisper. "He's been crying." "Oh no, not again," said Omri. "Honestly, Boone, at your age..." Just then they heard their teacher calling them from the school door. "Come on, you two. You've not got the day off, you know." "Give me your knife," said Omri to Little Bear on sudden impulse. "Then I'll put you two together." With only a moment's hesitation, Little Bear handed over the knife. Omri slipped it into a small breast pocket of his shirt, which was empty, where it wouldn't easily get lost. Smart move. Then he said to Patrick, "Let me have Boone." "No!" "Just for the next lesson. Then at lunchtime you can have both of them. They'll keep each other company. They can't do each other much damage in a pocket." Reluctantly, Patrick handed Boone over. Omri then held them one in each hand so they were face to face. "Be good, you two. Try talking to each other instead of fighting. But whatever you do, don't make any noise." And he slipped them both into his left-hand pocket, and he and Patrick ran back into the school buildings. So there you have it, chapter 10 and 11. And next up, we'll be on to chapter 12, Trouble with Authority. Thanks for listening with me. This is my second book I'm reading through. I'm doing this for my kids, for your kids, for the kids at heart listening to this. I'll keep the chapters coming. Please subscribe. All I'm doing is posting up chapters of different, award-winning children's books from when I grew up, things that were read to me. Hope you enjoy them. Always enjoy your feedback. Always enjoy seeing the viewership and the subscribers going up. That's what keeps me going here. I appreciate it. And see you on the next chapter.